I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Wade Allen, who is responsible for some of the best stunts of the season, particularly on the final season of Barry. And Wade, with the show having just recently ended, and what you've been able to accomplish over the 4 years, creating these kind of really fantastic sequences, and you won an Emmy for it. I'm just curious, is now that it's kind of in the rearview mirror, like how do you look back at your time working with Bill and Alec on this show?
Yeah, I mean, I look back at my time fondly is the first word that comes to mind, and because the wound is pretty fresh. I'm still sad that it's over. I mean, it was 4 seasons that spanned 6 years of my life because we were in and out of the pandemic, and you know, I know you hear this a lot, and I've said it a lot in interviews because it's true, and it's part of what makes it a bittersweet kind of a situation. It really was the most fun, most rewarding, most collaborative, most laugh-filled experience of my career, and so I'm not sure it will ever be replicated. The show was received so well, and it was just a very special thing. And being on set, because I get this question a lot, like, hey, what's it like to be on set with Bill? What's Bill like on set? Bill's on set like you would exactly want Bill to be. It's fucking hysterical most of the time. I mean, it's serious, and it got heavy, especially this last season got heavy. And his workload was massive between writing and starring in and directing everything at the end, but he's still Bill at times, and you still find yourself like crying, laughing just on a Tuesday afternoon for no specific reason other than Bill's just fucking hysterical. And so it's stuff like that that's a little abnormal for certainly what's been my experience, in nearly 25 years of shooting. That's what, that's my takeaway from it, and that's what I'm gonna miss the most, I guess.
It's interesting because I've spoken to so many people, not just in the cast, but also people who work on the crew, and to a T, you mentioned the word collaborative in that Bill really wants people's ideas, and it's very much a back and forth. It all fits in his vision, but it's very much a back and forth, and he welcomes ideas. In the time that was that always there from the beginning?
Yeah, Bill and Alec both have been super collaborative from the very beginning. And, you know, there are things those guys are really, really good at, and there are things that maybe are a little outside their wheelhouse. And specifically, like in the first season, like, hey, we're going to raid a stash house. What would that look like? How would these guys dress? What would they talk about before they went in there? How would they move when they go in there? And so you know, those questions would be asked, and they would just look at us, and myself and Duffy Gaver, who's a good friend of mine, who's an ex-Navy SEAL, and Duffy and I kind of were responsible for all of their weapons and tactical training, all Barry's weapons and tactical training over the course of all 4 seasons, and so when it came to things like that, they would just look and go, "Well, what do we do now?" And so it was, it was awesome. They knew the tone of the scene. They knew the comedic beats of the scene. They knew, the story they wanted to tell. They were just maybe missing some of the physicality, some of the nuts and bolts when it came to things like that that were a little outside what either of them had done in the past, really.
Yeah, I want to eventually. I do want to talk about some of the big pieces of season four, but I think what's most interesting to a lot of people is that it's more than just these big sequences that you're responsible for. And could you shed some light on like some of the smaller moments that you're kind of responsible for?
Yes. So okay. So here's a smaller moment that never actually made it on screen, but is one of my favorite moments to look back on. Um, in season one, Janice Moss is meant to find a flyer that was Gene Cousineau as as Peter Pan in his telling of Neverland. And I said to Bill and the team, I'm like, hey, what if she like stumbled upon a GIF and it was like a GIF of just of Henry Winkler flying through the air dressed as Peter Pan, and they're like, if you can get him to do it, you can do whatever you want. And I went, oh, we're totally going to get him to do it. So we went to Henry and said, hey man, have you ever flown in a harness, like and done wire work ever? And he's like, no. And we said, would you like to? And he said, yes, absolutely. So we shot on green screen. We had Henry Winkler in a full like stunt harness, the same that you would see like on a Marvel movie, and in these wires, and we would just fly him back and forth, and it was hysterical and wonderful, and he loved it, and it was just one of those things that ultimately never made the final cut, but it was this tiny moment, like at the time we hadn't done Ronnie Lilly and we hadn't even rolled the car. I mean, that the end of season 1 with Hiro Murai, we rolled a Suburban at 50 miles an hour on an airstrip that we built out in Acton. Like that, we built a functional airstrip, landed an airplane on it, and then cannoned a Suburban at 50 plus. So we hadn't done any of that yet, but we had this one quiet little moment with Henry that was just, that needed every bit as much attention as rolling a car at 50 miles an hour, because it's Henry and he's a national treasure and we don't want him to be injured in any way. And so the show really did kind of span the spectrum of things like that.
Yeah, there's 3 really big sequences in this season that I want to focus on, but I actually want to focus on the one that makes me laugh the most, and that is the rocket launcher, Hank and the failed rocket launcher, which I read somewhere, someone called it's a perfect description, something akin between Four Lions and a Looney Tunes cartoon. And I just talk me through that. What were some of the challenges of that? Because it's so perfect.
Yeah, it really was perfect. The challenges were this. We had a lot of space for all of Fuchs guys to run, both down and up. They had to cover a lot of space, so we sort of had to hide guys as if they were just emerging out of everywhere, and hide guys right around the corner, and or hide behind a bush, and you're popping out. And so I'm giving all these verbal cues to send different stunt guys out at different times, coming from different directions to chase the car. But before we even get to them, like we wanted it to look like they were leaving really fast, clearly. So the guy in the pink shirt is a stunt guy named Chris Palermo, and Chris is a really, really, really good driver. And I also needed a stunt guy who could be funny and maybe didn't look like the conventional stuntman. And so, with the rocket thing, when he's putting the rocket in the rocket launcher and he's saying, eat your food, and he's, using that accent, like Bill just kind of let him go and gave some suggestions, and Chris ran with it, because there was no time to cut between Chris putting the rocket in and then Chris getting in the car and having to do what he did. And as soon as he what you don't see is, as soon as he gets in the car, like off the passenger side of the car is the entire like crew. There's no space. So I needed someone who was a really good driver and could be really precise with their driving. But there is a moment where we're focused on Chris, and do we take Hank? I think Anthony got in the car, and then so Chris like slams on the gas, gets sideways in that car, races down the street. We're queuing all the stunt guys to come out. Then we get into that big dirt open area. Well, Hank's double was in the back of the car. So Hank's double gets out of the car and goes running and then dives off that cliff into, we had built, the cliff kind of drops off there in Malibu, and we had built just below the frame where you'd be able to see it. We built a big pad catcher. So he's basically running, his double's running on the phone, simulating this phone call that Fuchs is having with NoHo, and then he just bails off the end. So between having a good driver, someone who's also funny, the shirt helped, and then Texas switching the double midway through, and then having stunt guys come from, you know, all different directions, it made a complicated oneer. But I think ultimately it ended up it paid off, and it was really funny and really fun to do.
It's hysterical. And then there's the season 4, the episode 4, the grain, the sand scene, the burying everybody alive, and that I have read just the contraptions involved alone in getting all the people down safely. That it always makes me wonder: has there ever been a thing that you look at in a script and go, "I don't know how the hell we're going to do this"?
Yeah, that I mean, yeah, so I'll ask myself that question periodically, like, hey, how are we going to do this? I wonder. And then I'll say that to myself when I'm reading it the first time, and then you get in a room with other people and everyone, like, I'll bring some ideas and visual effects and special effects, and everyone, and we kind of go, okay, yeah, that all makes sense. I think that's what we're going to do. And part of it is us performing practically. Some of it is visual effects taking over and helping out. And this was, you know, an instance where we all got in the room and just kind of looked at each other, and there were crickets, and we were like, I don't know how this is going to go. And because, you know, we I've done things where you have people emerge from a grave or whatever, and it's pretty simple stuff. But to lose, you know, Bill at the time was talking about 12 guys. To lose 12 guys down this chute and not lose all the material, the ground up corn husks that we had in there, because what we didn't want is, like, we open a trap door, they fall through, so does all the material, and then the visual effects department is left with a nightmare having to basically fill that void on camera with now with sand, and that wouldn't have worked for them at all. And so it became, how do we open enough space that the guys can go and then be able to shut that quick enough that the material still looks like it's going into that hole, but that it's sort of sealed over itself. And that really, I mean, the special effects boys had a structural engineer who was working on, you know, kind of what that trapdoor would look like and how that would open, because, you know, everything was a complicated component of it. There was, you know, there wasn't just the the fact that it was 12 humans, which is a lot of humans. There was the fact that we're 15, 18 feet off the ground. So now when they're coming out, they got to go someplace. And, you know, there was so much steel in that structure to hold up the weight of just I mean, we had so much weight on top of it that we're dropping these guys. There's no, they don't have a visual of where they're going. Once they start going, now you're along for the ride. That's it. Good luck. And so there are all these massive steel beams below the set floor that we're having to wrap in foam, because these guys are coming out and you don't want one of them to, like, find one of those with his head. So they're all sort of getting down, looking, pulling one another out, to make sure before we close that back up, nobody's arm or leg or foot or whatever is still caught in between. So that was a whole issue. And then Bill wanted this in one shot, one camera position. So we're just going to see them disappear, and then we're going to wait for a little bit, and, you know, there's going to be the drama of, like, oh my god, did Cristobal just get buried alive? And then we're finally going to start to push in later and find that his head's still above the sand. So that was a complicated component. Whether, you know, when camera was too low, it didn't really, it just looked like they kind of disappeared. You didn't see them actively sinking through the sand, and that wasn't great. But then when camera was too high, you could see the hole where they were going through, so that didn't work either. So there's a lot of testing to kind of find the happy medium where we could sell the illusion of them being buried alive, um, but we didn't give away kind of where they were going, I guess. If that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. It sounds terrifying if you're claustrophobic,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Why the first time we tested it, because the other thing that I didn't mention was the speed at which they disappeared. And so in the beginning, when we were testing it, we had them going a little slower. Bill wanted them to disappear a little quicker, which is what we ultimately saw in the final cut. But I brought home and showed my wife the first ones, and she was like, "Oh, that's just like," she couldn't watch it. It looked like these guys were slowly being buried alive, and it was pretty gnarly.
well, and speaking of gnarly, when I spoke to Stephen Root, he was kind of just effusive in the way that the final shootout happened. And again, it's that hallmark of Bill, of this one kind of seemingly long take with the grenade and all that kind of stuff. I assume the choreography of that has to be just really worked out to the second.
Yeah, it was what you guys saw in the final cut was days and days and days of rehearsal, camera rehearsal, blocking rehearsal, like stunt rehearsal where it was just the wire gag and nobody else was around, like just, and then like that part of it alone was tricky for sure and took a lot of rehearsal time.
So just in the last, just to kind of finish up, is this one of those experiences that you kind of just go, wow, it's never going to, it's going to be hard to get any better than this?
Yeah. I've said that a lot, and I'm afraid it was kind of a unicorn. And every job has its own special things. I'm on a job now where we're shooting out in Utah, and everything that we're capturing looks like a John Ford film. So that's exciting, right? And there are components of exciting to every job. But Barry had everything. It was just, we had exciting stuff. It was amazing storytelling. The people, the cast and the crew were just, it was just it really was a once in a lifetime kind of a sitch. I can't imagine it getting any better than that. And that's that's what's so bittersweet about it, because it's such a happy memory. But I truly am sad it's over. I completely agree with Bill that it was time for it to be done. From a story standpoint, we couldn't keep going with Barry not getting caught, or not, facing any consequences for what he was doing. So I totally agree. But selfishly, I wish it would have gone for another 5 seasons, because it's just too much fun. Too much fun.
Yeah, and it looked like it. So, Wade, congratulations. Thank you so much. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout Emmy season. Wade Allen, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.